So good morning. In the event we haven't met, I'm Joyce. I'm the assistant minister here. Pleased to be able to stand in for Dr. Edward today. He will be back next Sunday, and of course he'll be at our glorious Thanksgiving Eve service this coming Wednesday. So for many of us this morning, the people of paradise are in our minds and hearts, especially those who have lost homes, those who have lost loved ones. And I want to be sure that you know that there is a direct way to provide financial assistance to them from our community. We've been in touch with Reverend Andy of the Paradise Center for Spiritual Living, which burnt down. And he let us know that the best way to financially assist the people of Paradise is with Visa gift cards, which can be used for the daily necessities of life. So today we're collecting Visa gift cards or donations at the information table in the social hall. Or there is a way you can personally send your Visa card with a note of love by mailing them to Reverend Mary Mitchell of the Redding Center, who will be driving over to Paradise to hand deliver the cards. You'll see her address is in the bulletin. Or if you're looking for another way to assist, you'll find a list of other resources for ways to give also at the information table. I'm reminded of the outpouring of love that came to us a year ago from all over the country, and I'm just pleased that our center has figured out a way that we can directly participate in now sharing our good. I'd like to begin to introduce today's topic with a story. It's a story that takes place on the other end of winter. It's a fine spring day, one of the first spring days in New York City. And a young woman walks out of her apartment enjoying the spring air, the spring sun on her skin. She's blind, but doesn't stop her from enjoying the day. And as she walks down the street, she continues to enjoy this fine day, and she comes to the crosswalk, and as she's standing there waiting, she hears a resonant male voice next to her which says, "May I have the pleasure of your company as I cross the street?" Well, with this delightful offer, she takes his arm and they walk across the street, and they're sharing how much they're enjoying the day. And she does notice that when they're almost to the end, there's New York drivers are honking at them, but nonetheless, they make it safely to the curb, and they take a few steps, and he gently releases her arm and says, "Thank you so much for taking the time to accompany a blind man across the street." It's actually a true story. I read it in Chicken Soup. It's got to be true. So that brings us to this title of our topic today, When the Blind Lead the Blind. It's the name of the essay of the day coming from Living the Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes, which we've been going through all year, and we're up to 388, and that's the title, When the Blind Lead the Blind. And in fact, the title is directly a teaching of Jesus, who said, when the blind lead the blind, not such a happy ending, they shall both end up in the ditch. Yeah, so what is this about? On one level, it's a reminder that we have to be careful as to what kind of thought we're following. If it's a negative thought or a false thought that we're following, whether our own or someone else's, it's not going to lead to a happy place. I noticed myself after years of fending off watching the news at night and in the morning, I now have an unfortunate habit to take my cell phone to turn off my alarm. and get captured by being intrigued about what's the latest dirt on a politician I don't like. And of course then, a half hour later when I get up, I'm not in a good mood for some reason. So our reading today is a warning that it's not a good idea actually to believe, not even to take in, but also not to believe everything we're told, to be on guard not to accept that which is not true. Such good advice for our time. Rather than following blindly what other people say or what Google says, or to really stop to assess, what do I know to be true? That's on one level of understanding of that phrase, when the blind lead the blind. If we look at this idea of the blind leading the blind more deeply, though, it starts to get more interesting. For Holmes, in the reading, points out that we all have blind spots. Really, I thought. Moi? I'm not aware of my blind spots. Of course, I'm not really aware of my blind spots when I'm driving either. They don't seem to exist. And so it was the other day that I was going into the right lane, and I looked in the mirrors, and I looked over my shoulder, and I safely went over, only to find a car there. Like, where did that car come from? It was a stark reminder that physical blind spots are real. And Holmes tells us that psychological blind spots are real too. He says this: wherever there is an emotional bias, there will be an intellectual blind spot. This means that we cannot think with truthful clarity about things that we are too emotionally affected by. Does this sound true to you? I'm not talking about you necessarily, but if you know someone who's got too big of an emotional charge about something, they don't seem to be thinking clearly or acting rationally around that topic. And I did. I tried to think about my own blind spots, and as far as I can tell, I don't have any. So as far as I can tell, I always act rationally. However, on occasion, someone else has pointed out to me that what I was thinking or doing wasn't totally rational. And after great amazement and mystification about what they could possibly be talking about, I have, on occasion, seen a blind spot in my own thinking. The fact is, I can't see them on my own. I need help. I need your help to see my blind spots. Now, by the way, I can see blind spots working in other people, and I use that language intentionally. I can see them working. I can see that someone's acting strangely, but I don't always connect it to the fact that it's one of their blind spots. I just think the person's doing something very strange, and by the way, they're wrong. Has that ever happened to you? You especially if it's surprising if you have somebody you really like, a good friend, you really like them a lot, and then one day they do something odd. It's very easy to pass judgment. It's easy even to write them off. And it's important to remember that what you're witnessing is them speaking or acting from one of their blind spots. And this is actually the good news of today's reading. It's the liberating news when we realize that we all have blind spots, that we all, from time to time, act in a way that isn't rational. Then we can be more tolerant and understanding of each other. Then we can forgive. We can forgive ourselves when we do something that someone points out is a bit odd. We can forgive others when they do something that seems odd or crazy or less than perfect. From the Book of the Month, Pema Chodron tells us, when we can recognize our own confusion with compassion, we can extend that compassion to others who are equally confused. When we can recognize our own confusion with compassion, we can extend that compassion to others who are equally confused. You know, this also gives us permission to not stay stuck in the ditch of our own limited thinking. We don't have to defend ourselves. We don't have to stay stuck in our position. We can open up to other possibilities. It's interesting how this metaphor of blindness shows up in different spiritual traditions. And so I am going to point to that very familiar story of the 5 blind men and the elephant that comes out of Hinduism. Many of us know it so well that you'll be able to lip sync with me along with the story. So there are 5 men who don't know what an elephant is. They've heard of it, but they don't know what it is. And there's an elephant coming to town, and they say, okay, this is it. We're going to find out what an elephant is. So the elephant arrives, and they surround it, and one of them's got his hands on the ear, and he says, I get it. An elephant's like a fan. And there's one with his arms around the trunk, and not the trunk, the leg of the elephant, and he says, oh, you're nuts. It's like a tree trunk. And somebody's feeling the sides of it and says, I don't know what you two are talking about. It's like a wall. And there's somebody at the tail saying, you know, you are crazy. You are crazy. It's like a rope. And finally, the one at the trunk says, people, get a grip. It's like a snake. So it is that they argue, and they fail to recognize that each one of them is holding a piece of the truth, of the whole. Each one of them is not recognizing that the others are also holding a piece of the truth. This story is often used as a metaphor for how we humans have a limited view. Each of us has a limited view of the wholeness of God. And indeed, in today's reading, Ernest Holmes speaks of how this can give rise to theological conflicts. He says, people are prone to say that they alone are right, or that their system of thought alone is right. They have not yet gotten a clearance back to the fundamental proposition that God is one, and that every one is an incarnation of the same God. Therefore, intolerance and harshness, unkindness and criticism, coldness and indifference are projected. This is one of those tricks which the mind plays on us. He's telling us here that when we forget that there is only one thing and that you and I are part of it, when we forget that you and I are equally expressions of it, when we forget that you and I are one, then we fall into intolerance and judgment of each other. Judgment of each other's mistakes, judgment of each other's viewpoints, judgment of each other's differing beliefs. There's a story in the Bible about this. We'll go through the story and then we'll take a metaphysical look at the Bible story. So it's a story that takes place after Jesus has left this plane. It's a story about a man who was so stuck in his intolerance of other religious beliefs that he was actually harming people. he was persecuting Christians. The man's name was Saul, and one day he was on the road to Damascus, in fact, with the intention to persecute these people who did not share his belief, to persecute Christians. As he was going along, a great light shone, which blinded him, and he fell to the ground. And he heard a voice that said, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Saul said, "Who are you?" And the voice said, "I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you persecute. Go into the city, and you will be told what to do." Now, at this point, Saul's blind. He's with other people. They did not hear the voice. He did. They are not blinded. He is. So they lead him into the city, and he sits in a room blind for 3 days, not eating, not drinking. And during that time, he received a vision of a man named Ananias who would come to him. And indeed, on the 4th day, a man named Ananias came and touched Saul's eyes, and Saul's vision was restored. After this, he, of course, changed his viewpoint on the beliefs of those Christians. He embraced the teachings of those he had formerly prosecuted. He began to preach about Jesus, and he changed his name to Paul. He is, of course, known as one of the foremost of the apostles and teachers in the early church. Now let's look at this from a metaphysical point of view. And when we look at something from a metaphysical point of view, all we're doing is realizing that the story is about ourselves, that each character in the story is an aspect of ourselves. So we're looking at the story of our own consciousness. From this perspective, it's actually a story about moving spiritually from a place of separation and judgment to a place of oneness. The beginning of the story, Saul, or perhaps we ourselves, is so blinded by his own viewpoint that not only is he judging others, he's harming them. Then there's the experience of light, the light of consciousness, the light of understanding, the light of truth. He falls to the ground. He falls into that ditch where his own error thinking has led him. Here's a voice. It's an internal voice that identifies itself as Jesus. Now, when there are references to Jesus, we can know that this is a reference to our own Christ consciousness. And what that is that aspect of ourselves that knows we are divine. That aspect of ourselves that knows we are divine. And that aspect of Saul, who knew he was divine, says, "Why are you persecuting me? Why are you harming me? Why are you resisting your own divine nature? Why are you denying your own wholeness?" Clearly, it's an invitation to move from the false perception of separation to the true understanding of oneness. It's a spiritual transformation symbolized by the fact that it took 3 days during which Saul couldn't see. He could not see the old viewpoint, the old world, the old understanding in which he had been functioning. During this time, he doesn't eat or drink. There's a cleansing, a releasing, a clearing out to make way for the new. And during the 3 days, his inner wisdom is activated, his connection with the Divine One. He receives an internal vision of what will happen, and indeed it does. What I like about this ancient story is that it assures us that it is possible to have our own lives illumined and guided in such a way that we know our own divinity. It gives us hope that there is a way back out of our own judgment, our own separation, back home into wholeness. So what do we do when we find ourselves in the ditch of judgment and separation? First, we can remember that God is everywhere. Spirit is everywhere, even in the ditch. No matter what I'm thinking, the Divine One hasn't gone anywhere. What else do we do when we're in a ditch? We look up. We raise our spiritual eyes to that heightened awareness of our true nature, of being inseparably one with God. And we can remember that there is that within us that is not blind. There is that within us that is untouched by anything we have thought. There is that within us which is untouched by any temporary error in understanding, untouched by anything we've ever said or done. We can remind ourselves that the full light of consciousness is always on. Whether we know it or not, the full light of consciousness is always on, and that no one has the power to mislead us, not even ourselves. We can be guided by these words of Ernest Holmes, who said, "The problems we face are not external. They are within. They are not some other person's fault, neither are they necessarily our own fault. They are the fault of ignorance, from which enlightenment alone can free us." So I realize that ignorance has two meanings. You know, it can be not knowing about something, being ignorant about something. On the other hand, it can be not seeing something, not paying attention to something. You know, like if somebody's bothering you and somebody else says, "Oh, just ignore him. Just don't pay attention." So if I'm in that ditch of separation, of judgment, it's an invitation to look again. What is it that I am ignoring? What is it that I am not seeing? What am I not paying attention to? What part of wholeness am I missing? It's an invitation to bring the light of truth, leading us back to knowing that there is only good, eternally, and that each one of us is part of it. And so as we end today, right here, right now, let us bring that light of understanding into our own minds. I invite you to go within, to relax, to know that all is well. And as you go within, I invite you to bring to mind a situation that seems challenging at the moment. Maybe it's just some little challenge, maybe it's a bigger challenge, but a situation that seems difficult. And with that situation in mind, we simply ask the divine within, "Show me that which I have been ignoring, that which I have not been seeing." And we add the affirmation for our ongoing revealing of truth as we say, "May I see this situation as Spirit does." And now bringing to mind a person you may have been judging. With them in mind, we again say to the divine within, show me that which I have not been seeing. And as this request continues to unfold in our lives, we simply add the affirmation, may I know this person as God does. And finally, shining the divine light of consciousness onto you yourself. Asking the question, how does the Divine One see me? Show me the good that I am, that I have not yet seen. Show me my wholeness. And so with thanksgiving and assurance for the way that this understanding of wholeness continues to deepen and reveal itself in our life, I bring our attention now to that one source of all intelligence, of all understanding, of all good, of all love. I recognize that there is only this one power at work eternally for each of us, continuously revealing more and more good in our lives, in our relationships, in our circumstances. I give thanks that this is true. I give thanks that the ultimate power is the power of love, and it is always loving and blessing each one of us eternally. With gratitude, I simply say, Amen. And as we begin to return our attention to this wonderful spiritual community of ours, whether you've been here a long time or it's your first time here or it's your first time back in a long time, I hope you share the feeling with me that it's so good to be together in this time and place.